If anything happens to me, check table 12. Hannah Brooks whispered the words into an old phone with 1% battery left. Frost clung to her eyelashes. Her blue diner apron was stiff with ice. A blood-speckled receipt trembled between her numb fingers, and her mother's bent name tag dug into her palm hard enough to leave a mark. The freezer door did not move. The red recording light blinked once. Then the screen went black. 3 hours earlier, nobody in the diner had looked at Hannah twice. That was the strange thing about being a woman like her. At 31 years old, with soft curves that filled every uniform she wore and a face most people forgot the second they looked away, she had mastered the art of becoming background noise. The diner sat beside Interstate 81, open 24 hours a day beneath a flickering neon sign that buzzed like a dying insect. Truck drivers came and went. College kids stumbled in after midnight. Families stopped during road trips. Nobody remembered the waitress who refilled their coffee. Hannah knew every crack in the floor tiles, every stain hidden beneath the counter, every customer who left exactly 15%, and every customer who never tipped at all. She also knew something else. Invisible people saw everything. "Sweetheart, table 6 needs syrup." Rick Palmer's voice floated across the room. Calm, pleasant, professional. The kind of voice that made strangers think he was a good man. Hannah grabbed the bottle. "Got it." Rick smiled at a customer while speaking to her without looking. "And maybe let Melissa handle the front booths tonight. You know how people are. They like a certain look when they walk in." The customer chuckled awkwardly. Rick laughed too, as if they were sharing an innocent joke. Hannah forced a smile. She had heard versions of that sentence for years. Not ugly enough to be fired. Not pretty enough to be seen. "Of course," she said. The diner moved on. It always moved on. That was what hurt most. Nobody defended you when cruelty arrived wrapped in politeness. Around 11:30, Hannah began closing duties. She carried a tray of empty coffee mugs past table 12. The booth sat in the back corner near a security camera. It was Rick's favorite table. He always served it himself. Tonight, 2 men in expensive jackets occupied the booth. Neither touched their food. Neither looked at the menu. One slid a sealed envelope across the table. The other slipped something beneath a receipt folder. Then both left through separate exits. Hannah stopped. Just for a second. Long enough to notice that the coffee cups were still full. Long enough to realize nobody had actually eaten. She should have kept walking. Instead, she returned 5 minutes later to wipe the table. Under the receipt folder sat a crumpled transaction slip. Nothing special. Just thermal paper and faded ink. But one number snagged her attention. Hannah frowned. The timestamp read 1:42 a.m. She checked the clock above the pie display. It was only 11:37 p.m. For a moment she thought she was tired. Then she checked again. Same timestamp. Same impossible time. "Find something interesting?" Rick asked softly from behind her. Hannah nearly dropped the receipt. He stood only a few feet away, smiling. Not angry. Not nervous. Smiling. The silence stretched between them. Hannah folded the receipt once and slipped it into her apron pocket. "Just cleaning tables." Rick's eyes lingered on the pocket. Then he nodded. "Good girl." He walked away. Across the diner, a man seated alone in a dark booth lowered his coffee cup. He had not touched his pie. He had not spoken for nearly an hour. But his eyes followed Hannah as she moved through the room, and for the first time that night, something did not add up. Because the security camera above table 12 had been unplugged, yet its red recording light was still blinking. The red recording light kept blinking. Hannah stared at it from across the diner, a damp cleaning rag hanging forgotten in her hand. The camera above table 12 was dead. She knew it was dead because she had watched Rick unplug it 3 nights ago while muttering something about a wiring issue. Yet there it was, glowing steadily in the reflection of the front window. A customer pushed through the door, and the bell above it chimed. The sound snapped her back into motion. Coffee. Refills. Dessert checks. Credit card slips. The familiar rhythm of late-night service wrapped around her again, but something had changed. The receipt in her apron pocket felt heavier than paper should. Around midnight, the diner settled into its usual hush. The rush was gone. Only truckers, insomniacs, and people avoiding home remained. The industrial dishwasher growled behind the kitchen doors. Neon from the open sign painted blue streaks across the wet floor tiles. Hannah wiped down a counter and watched Rick from the corner of her eye. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed. He laughed with customers. helped a busboy stack chairs, complimented a regular on his new pickup truck. Nothing about him suggested a man worried about a waitress carrying evidence in her pocket. That bothered her more than if he had threatened her. People who weren't afraid usually had a reason. Near 1 o'clock, Melissa drifted beside her carrying a tray of pie plates. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Hannah forced a smile. "Why?" Melissa shrugged. "You keep looking at table 12. Hannah almost answered. Almost showed her the receipt. But then she noticed Rick watching them through the pass-through window. Smiling again. Not listening. Just watching. "Long shift," Hannah said instead. Melissa nodded and walked away. 20 minutes later, Hannah slipped into the back office under the excuse of grabbing inventory sheets. The room smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee. Rick's desk sat perfectly organized. Too organized. While searching for a clipboard, her eyes landed on the shift log pinned beside the payroll board. She froze. Her name appeared twice. One entry showed her clocking out at 12:08 a.m. Another showed her still working at 12:08 a.m. same minute. Same employee number. Different records. Hannah stepped closer. Her pulse quickened. Somebody had altered the log. Before she could study it longer, footsteps approached. She grabbed a stack of napkins and slipped out just as Rick entered. "Everything all right?" he asked. His voice was warm. Concerned. The perfect manager. Hannah held up the napkins. "Needed supplies." Rick nodded. "Good. We all appreciate team players." His gaze dropped briefly toward her apron pocket. Then he smiled and moved past her. "Team players." The words followed her back onto the floor. At 1:17 a.m., the man in the dark booth finally moved. He stood, left cash beside his untouched pie, and walked toward the register. Up close, he looked older than she first thought. Early 40s maybe. Expensive coat. Calm eyes. The kind of face people remembered. Hannah reached for the receipt printer. "Can I help you, sir?" He glanced toward table 12. Who usually sits there? The question seemed casual. It wasn't. Hannah felt it immediately. Different people. Do they order? His voice remained even. Hannah hesitated. Sometimes. The man nodded once. Silence stretched between them. Not awkward. Intentional. Then he pointed toward the security camera. Funny thing. Hannah followed his gaze. What? Dead cameras usually don't blink. For the first time that night, someone else had noticed. Before Hannah could answer, Rick appeared beside them. Problem. The man looked at him. Just looked. Rick's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. No problem, the stranger said softly. Just asking questions. Then he left. No introduction. No name. Nothing. 10 minutes later, while taking out trash behind the diner, Hannah checked the receipt again beneath the yellow security light. This time she noticed something she had missed before. Printed beneath the impossible timestamp was a customer number linked to table 12. Customer ID 44721. The same 5 digits appeared on a faded payroll record taped inside the office earlier that night, beside the name of an employee who had supposedly died 2 years ago. The number followed Hannah all the way home. 44721. She saw it in the reflection of the bus window, in the steam rising from her microwave dinner, in the dark circles beneath her eyes when she stood in front of her bathroom mirror at 3 in the morning. By sunrise, she had convinced herself it was a coincidence. By noon, she knew it wasn't. The diner smelled like bacon grease and burnt coffee when she arrived for her next shift. The lunch crowd had already started rolling in. Families, construction workers, retirees who treated the place like a second living room. Life moved normally. That was the unsettling part. The world kept turning while something underneath it quietly shifted out of place. Hannah tied on her apron and slipped the receipt into the pocket behind her order pad. She had barely clocked in when Rick appeared beside her. Morning, Hannah. His smile looked effortless. How'd you sleep? The question should have felt friendly. Somehow it didn't. Fine. Good. His gaze dropped briefly toward her apron. Always important to get rest. Fatigue makes people see patterns that aren't really there. Then he walked away. Hannah stood still for a moment. He had never asked about her sleep before. Not once in 3 years. The pressure settled deeper into her chest. Around 2 o'clock, she found an excuse to return to the office. The payroll board was still there. So was the faded employee list. She waited until nobody was looking before comparing it to the photo she had secretly taken the night before. The employee number matched exactly. 44721, same digits. Same record. The name beside it read, Nathan Keller. Status: deceased. Terminated 26 months ago. Yet payroll deposits had continued every Friday. Hannah checked again. The record wasn't hidden. It was sitting in plain sight, almost like nobody expected anyone to actually read it. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Hannah quickly stepped away from the board. Two voices drifted through the partially open door. Rick's was easy to recognize. The second voice wasn't. Male. Older. Low. You should have destroyed it. Silence followed. Then Rick answered. I thought I did. Hannah froze. The office suddenly felt smaller. The voices moved away before she could hear anything else. When she returned to the dining room, the man from the dark booth was there again. Same table. Same untouched coffee. Same charcoal coat hanging neatly across the back of his chair. He appeared to be reading a newspaper. Yet Hannah noticed something strange. The paper never turned. She approached with a coffee pot. Refill. He looked up. Please. She poured. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then he folded the paper and asked, You work every shift? Most of them. Long hours. Bills don't pay themselves. His eyes drifted toward the security camera above table 12. Still blinking. Hannah followed his gaze. The red light flashed steadily. Funny thing about broken equipment, she said carefully. Sometimes it works exactly when it shouldn't. One corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Not quite approval. Something else. Interest, maybe. Before either could continue, Rick appeared. Again, like he had been waiting for the conversation. Everything okay over here? He asked. Hannah noticed it this time. The interruption wasn't casual. It was immediate. Precise. The stranger looked at Rick for a long moment. Just discussing cameras. Rick laughed lightly. Trust me, ours barely work. Nobody laughed with him. The silence that followed felt heavier than words. That evening, while reconciling receipts near the register, Hannah found another discrepancy. Different customer. Different day. Same impossible pattern. A credit card charge stamped at 2:11 a.m. despite the transaction being processed before midnight. Her pulse quickened. Once was strange. Twice was evidence. She slid both receipts together and held them beneath the overhead light. The paper edges lined up perfectly. The timestamps didn't. Then she noticed something even colder. Both receipts had been approved by the same manager authorization code. A code belonging to Nathan Keller, the employee who had supposedly been dead for 2 years. The employee who had been dead for 2 years was still approving transactions. Hannah stared at the authorization code until the numbers blurred. Around her, the diner continued breathing in its slow mechanical rhythm. Forks touched plates. Ice rattled in glasses. The coffee machine hissed. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary people. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. She folded both receipts carefully and slipped them behind the photograph she kept in her wallet, the one of her mother standing outside the diner 20 years earlier in the same blue uniform. Her mother had taught her something before she died. If people worked hard to hide a thing, never leave it where they expect you to. Look. The next afternoon, Rick called a staff meeting. Not in the diner. Not near customers. Upstairs. The private dining room that almost nobody used. Hannah had only been inside twice. The room looked like it belonged in a different world. Dark walnut walls. Leather chairs. Crystal light fixtures hanging above polished wood. The smell of expensive cologne and fresh flowers. Every surface seemed designed to remind ordinary people they were temporary visitors. Hannah felt large there. Not physically. Socially. Like her presence disrupted the room's balance. Melissa sat quietly near the wall. 2 regional supervisors occupied the far end of the table. One woman in a navy blazer flipped through paperwork without ever looking directly at the staff. Rick stood near a projector screen smiling. Nothing serious, he said. Just some procedural updates. The supervisors nodded. One of them, a thin man with silver-framed glasses, adjusted a stack of reports. Corporate has asked us to review transaction discrepancies, he explained. Routine audit. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. Rick's smile never moved. The woman in the blazer finally looked up. Her gaze passed over everyone before settling briefly on Hannah. Some employees have expressed concerns regarding accounting procedures. Her voice was calm. Professional. Naturally, we take all concerns seriously. The room grew quiet. Hannah recognized the tone immediately. It wasn't respect. It was the sound people used before dismissing you politely. The woman folded her hands. However, we must also be careful not to confuse misunderstanding with misconduct. Several heads nodded. Hannah remained still. Late-night shifts can be exhausting, the woman continued. People become emotional. Details blur. Assumptions happen. Nobody said Hannah's name. They didn't need to. Every eye eventually drifted toward her. Rick lowered his gaze as if embarrassed for her. Hannah works very hard, he said gently. Sometimes too hard. The silver-haired supervisor smiled sympathetically. Exactly. Hannah felt herself shrinking in that room. Not because they raised their voices. Because they didn't. They rapped out in concern. Turned dismissal into professionalism. It was cleaner that way. Safer. Then Rick placed a document on the table. Just a clarification statement. His voice remained warm. To prevent future confusion. Hannah looked down. The statement claimed she had misread several receipts due to fatigue and accepted that no financial irregularities existed. A single signature line waited at the bottom. Silence settled over the room. Heavy. Deliberate. Everyone watched. Not openly. Carefully. The way people watched when they already knew the outcome. Hannah stared at the paper. Then at her mother's bent name tag pinned inside her apron pocket. She thought about hospital bills. Double shifts. Every time someone had smiled while asking her to make herself smaller. Her fingers closed around the receipts. No. The word wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Rick blinked once. No. I won't sign something I know isn't true. Nobody moved. The room somehow became quieter. The silver-haired supervisor removed his glasses. Miss Brooks, these matters can be complicated. Hannah nodded. The timestamps aren't complicated. Rick's smile returned. Smaller now. Tighter. You see, he said softly to the supervisors. This is exactly what I meant. She's become emotionally attached to an assumption. The woman in the blazer sighed. Almost regretfully. Like Hannah had disappointed her. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. No shouting. No threats. Just polite isolation. As everyone filed out, Hannah remained behind long enough to collect her notepad. That was when she noticed something reflected in the black projector screen. Rick was standing near the supervisors. Smiling again. Relaxed again. Until he reached into his jacket and quietly removed his phone. The screen lit for less than a second before he hit it. But it was enough. Hannah recognized the number instantly. It ended in 44721. The number ending in 44721 stayed with Hannah through the rest of the shift, like a splinter beneath the skin. She kept seeing the brief glow of Rick's phone reflected in the black projector screen. Not because she wanted to. Because she couldn't stop. Most people forgot details. Hannah collected them. It was how she'd survived years of being overlooked. 3 days passed. Nothing happened. Or at least nothing obvious. Rick remained friendly. The supervisors never returned. The receipts stayed hidden behind her mother's photograph. Life settled into a routine dangerous enough to feel normal again. Then Thursday night changed everything. The rain started just before midnight. Heavy sheets drumming against the diner windows. Around 1:30 a.m., an elderly dishwasher named Walter failed to show up for his shift. Nobody seemed concerned except Hannah. Walter had worked there 14 years. He was 72 years old, diabetic, and obsessed with punctuality. If he was late, something was wrong. Maybe he overslept, Melissa said. Walter. Hannah shook her head. Walter gets here 20 minutes early for his own birthday. Rick overheard the conversation and laughed lightly. I'm sure he's fine. Then he changed the subject. Too quickly, Hannah noticed. At 2:10 a.m., while taking trash to the alley, she saw a cardboard box sitting beside the dumpster. Rain had soaked through one side. Most people would have ignored it. Hannah almost did. Then she saw Walter's name written in faded marker across the top flap. Her pulse kicked once. Hard. She crouched beside the box. Inside were old uniforms, kitchen towels, paperwork, and a cracked flip phone wrapped in a plastic sandwich bag. She recognized it immediately. Walter never owned a smartphone. Said they were too complicated. Hannah looked around. The alley was empty except for rain and shadows. She slipped the phone into her apron pocket. Back inside, she plugged it into a forgotten charger behind the hostess stand. The screen flickered to life 15 minutes later. Battery, 3%. One saved contact. One voicemail. Nothing else. Just a single number labeled manager. Hannah stared at the screen. Her fingers felt cold despite the heat from the kitchen. She pressed play. Static filled the speaker first. Then Walter's voice. Weak. Breathing hard. Rick, I know what table 12 is for. Silence. A scrape. Like a chair moving across concrete. You told me nobody would get hurt. Another pause. Then the message ended abruptly. Not naturally. Cut off. As if someone had stopped the recording. Hannah listened twice. 3 times. By the 4th, she noticed something else. A timestamp. The voicemail had been left at 1:42 a.m. The exact same impossible time printed on the first receipt. Her heart hammered. The diner suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too small. She copied the voicemail onto her own old phone and hid Walter's device inside her locker. Then she looked up and froze. The man from the dark booth was sitting alone again, watching the rain. Not eating, not reading, just watching. Something inside her made a decision before fear could stop it. She crossed the room. Sir. He looked up. His expression didn't change. Hannah placed Walter's phone on the table. I think someone wanted this gone. The man glanced at the cracked device, but didn't touch it immediately. Several seconds passed, long enough for Hannah to wonder if she'd made a mistake. Then he picked it up, listened to the voicemail once. No reaction. Listened again. Still nothing. But his thumb stopped moving when Walter mentioned table 12. Silence stretched between them, the kind that felt heavier than anger. Finally, he set the phone down. Where did you get this? Hannah told him. Every detail. No embellishment. No drama. When she finished, he asked only one question. Who knew Walter kept records? Rick. The man's gaze drifted toward the office door. Thoughtful. Controlled. Dangerous in a way Hannah couldn't explain. At that exact moment, Rick emerged from the hallway carrying a stack of invoices. He saw the phone, saw Hannah, saw the man, and for the first time since she'd met him, Rick Palmer forgot to smile. For a fraction of a second, Rick Palmer looked afraid. Not nervous, not surprised, afraid. Then the expression vanished so quickly Hannah almost convinced herself she had imagined it. The smile returned. The easy posture returned. The friendly manager everyone trusted stepped back into place. Everything all right over here? Rick asked. The man in the dark booth rested Walter's cracked phone beside his coffee cup. Depends. His voice was calm. Does Walter usually leave personal property in dumpsters? Rick laughed softly. Walter? Half the stuff he owns belongs in a dumpster. Nobody joined the joke. The silence that followed seemed to linger a little too long. Rick eventually excused himself and disappeared toward the office. Hannah watched him go. The man beside her continued staring at the phone. You knew Walter? She asked quietly. No. Then why do you care? He lifted his eyes toward her. People disappear. That was all he said. Somehow it felt heavier than a speech. Later that night, after the diner closed, rain tapped softly against the front windows. The neon open sign buzzed above empty booths. The dishwasher rumbled in the kitchen. Ordinary sounds. Yet the building felt different now. Like a house after someone whispered a secret into its walls. Hannah finished wiping down counters when her phone vibrated. An unknown number. One text message. Don't trust payroll. No signature. No explanation. Just 6 words. Her pulse jumped. She looked around the empty dining room. Nobody seemed to notice. She slipped the phone away. Across town, the man from the booth sat alone in a quiet office overlooking the river. A legal pad rested beside a glass of untouched bourbon. Walter's phone sat disassembled on the desk. Across from him stood a gray-haired attorney named Samuel Briggs, one of the few people trusted with difficult questions. Samuel flipped through a folder. I checked the employee file. And Nathan Keller died 26 months ago. I know that. Payroll doesn't. Silence. Samuel slid a printed report across the desk. Direct deposits. Weekly payments. Consistent. Thousands of dollars. The account remained active long after Keller's death certificate had been filed. The man studied the report. No reaction crossed his face. But Samuel knew him well enough to recognize danger when it became quiet. Who approved them, he asked. Samuel hesitated. Officially, no. The attorney swallowed. Rick Palmer. The room seemed colder. The man picked up Walter's voicemail again. Played it once more. This time he listened beyond the words. Beyond the breathing. Beyond the fear. There was another sound hidden underneath. A faint mechanical hum. Familiar. He replayed it. Then again. His eyes narrowed slightly. Pause. Samuel stopped the recording. The man pointed toward the waveform. Right there. The attorney listened carefully. Refrigeration unit? Industrial freezer. Silence returned. Not confusion this time. Calculation. Meanwhile, Hannah sat at her small kitchen table eating canned soup from a chipped bowl. The television murmured in the background. Her mother's old hospital bills occupied one corner of the table. Payment reminders, collection notices, red stamps demanding attention. She stared at them for a long moment. People always assumed money was what she wanted. A raise, a settlement, a reward. They were wrong. She touched one of the envelopes gently. I just want somebody to stop lying, she whispered to the empty apartment. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from the same unknown number. Check the shift logs from March 14th. Then nothing. No reply. No name. Hannah opened the employee portal. The records took several minutes to load. When they finally appeared, her stomach tightened. Nathan Keller had supposedly worked a shift on March 14th. 8 hours. Clocked in at 6:02 a.m., clocked out at 2:11 p.m. The problem was simple. March 14th was the date printed on his death certificate. Back in the office overlooking the river, the man sat motionless as Samuel placed one final document on the desk. A visitor access report from the diner's restricted storage area. Hundreds of entries. Thousands of names. Only one access card appeared every single time money moved through table 12. The card belonged to Rick Palmer. The second card belonged to someone else. Someone the man had personally recommended for the position 3 years ago. Someone he had trusted without question. For the first time that night, he stopped looking at Rick's name and stared at the second one. The second access card belonged to Evelyn Hart. For nearly 3 years, she had been the regional operations director overseeing 12 diners across 3 states. Efficient, respected, trusted, the kind of executive whose emails were answered immediately and whose recommendations rarely got questioned. The man in the office read her name. Twice. Then a third time. Samuel said nothing. He knew better. The most dangerous moments were never loud. They were quiet enough to hear someone breathing. How many transfers? The man finally asked. 37 confirmed. And she approved them? Samuel nodded. Every one. The room fell silent. Rain traced slow lines down the glass wall overlooking the river. A phone vibrated once on the desk. Neither man reached for it. Across town, Hannah stood behind the counter filling sugar dispensers when Evelyn Hart walked into the diner. Expensive navy coat. Perfect posture. Gold watch. She looked like someone who belonged in boardrooms, not roadside diners. The room changed when she entered. Rick straightened immediately. Melissa lowered her eyes. Even customers seemed to notice her. Hannah felt something tighten in her chest. She recognized the face from company newsletters. Evelyn smiled warmly. Good morning, everyone. The warmth never reached her eyes. 10 minutes later, Rick approached Hannah carrying a clipboard. Need a favor. His tone sounded casual. What's the favor? Corporate review. He handed her a form. Just confirm Walter removed several files before leaving employment. Hannah looked down. Walter had never left employment. He had simply vanished. That's not true. Rick sighed as though disappointed. Hannah, nobody's asking you to lie. The paper is. A muscle flickered in his jaw. Gone almost instantly. You're making this harder than it needs to be. For who? For the first time, Rick didn't answer immediately. Then he smiled. You always think people are against you. Hannah folded the clipboard shut and handed it back. No. Her voice stayed calm. I just remember things. The smile slipped. Only for a second. But she saw it. Later that afternoon, the man from the dark booth arrived before the dinner rush. This time he didn't sit in the corner. He chose table 12, the booth everyone quietly avoided. Hannah noticed Rick notice. That mattered. The man ordered black coffee. Nothing else. Then he placed a sealed manila envelope on the table and left it unopened beside his cup. The envelope sat there for nearly an hour. Customers came and went. Staff moved around it carefully. Nobody touched it. Eventually Rick approached. Waiting for someone? The man stirred his coffee once. Maybe. Rick glanced at the envelope. Important. Depends who's interested in it. Silence settled over the booth. Hannah watched from the register. Rick laughed lightly. I wouldn't know. No. No. The man nodded, as if accepting the answer. Then he looked down at the untouched envelope. Interesting. Rick shifted slightly. The movement was tiny. Almost invisible. But Hannah caught it. So did the man. People were usually curious about sealed envelopes. Rick looked nervous. Those weren't the same thing. 30 minutes later, Evelyn joined them. She sat across from the man. Ordered tea. Never touched it. The envelope remained unopened between them. You had questions? She asked. A few. About operations? About trust. Evelyn's smile remained professional. Trust is everything in this business. The man looked at her for a long moment, then at Rick, then back at her. I agree. Hannah carried a tray past the booth. As she approached, she noticed something absurdly small, something nobody else would have cared about. Evelyn signed her tea receipt left-handed, but every corporate memo hanging in the office had been signed right-handed. Hannah kept walking, kept her face neutral, kept breathing, yet the detail lodged itself in her mind. 40 minutes later, the trap closed. The man finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single photocopied access log. Nothing else. No accusations. No speech. Just one sheet of paper. He slid it across the table. Can either of you explain why this card was used in restricted storage 6 times after midnight on dates the owner was supposedly out of state? Evelyn answered first. Too quickly. That isn't my card. Silence. Rick looked at her. The man looked at her. Hannah froze beside the coffee station. Because nobody had said whose card it was. Nobody spoke. The diner seemed to hold its breath around table 12. Evelyn's answer hung in the air like a crack spreading through glass. That isn't my card, she repeated, softer this time. The man across from her did not look down at the access log. He looked at her face, then at Rick, then at the untouched tea growing cold between them. Hannah stood near the coffee station, one hand wrapped around a pot she had forgotten to set down. Rick recovered first. There has to be some mistake, he said smoothly. Access records get corrupted all the time. The man nodded once. Do they? His voice remained calm. Too calm. Evelyn reached for the paper. I'd like to see the full report. You already know what's in it. The words landed quietly. That made them worse. For the first time, a shadow crossed Evelyn's expression. Not panic. Recognition. Hannah felt it immediately. The trap was over. Whatever came next was no longer a test. The man reached into his coat and placed a second item on the table. A flash drive. Small. Ordinary. The kind nobody noticed until it mattered. Rick's eyes locked onto it. What's that? He asked. Nobody answered him. A few minutes later, every manager, supervisor, and senior employee had been called upstairs to the private dining room. The same room where Hannah had been asked to sign away the truth. The same polished table. The same crystal lights. The same expensive silence. Only now nobody seemed comfortable sitting there. A monitor glowed at the end of the room. Samuel Briggs stood beside it with a laptop open. Hannah remained near the wall. Not hidden. Not central. Present. That mattered. The flash drive clicked into place. Security footage appeared on the screen. Grainy. Time-stamped. Restored from a backup server nobody realized still existed. The first clip showed table 12. Envelopes changing hands. Cash moving. Faces turning away from cameras. The second showed restricted storage. Rick entering after midnight. Then Evelyn. Then Rick again. Dates. Times. Months of them. Nobody interrupted. Nobody could. Then came the third video. Hannah felt her stomach tighten the moment it appeared. Walter. Alive. Sitting alone in storage. Speaking directly toward a camera he didn't know was recording. If something happens to me, check the freezer logs. His hands trembled. Rick said it was accounting. Evelyn said nobody would get hurt. The room went completely still. One of the supervisors removed his glasses. Another looked away. Rick opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. That doesn't prove. Samuel pressed a key. A new document appeared. Payroll records. Bank transfers. Dead employees receiving deposits. Money moving through shell accounts. Authorization codes tied to Nathan Keller after his death. Every trail connected. Every trail ended in the same place. Then Hannah stepped forward. Her hands shook slightly as she removed 2 worn receipts from her wallet. The original ones. The ones she had protected from the beginning. She laid them on the table beside her mother's photograph. The timestamps, she said quietly. That's where it started. Nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed her. She pointed to the impossible times. Then to the payroll entries. Then to Walter's recorded statement. One line connected to the next with brutal simplicity. The lie had always been there. People just never expected someone like Hannah to notice it. The man at the head of the table stared at the evidence for a long time. Longer than anyone else. His gaze drifted from the receipts to Walter's image frozen on the screen. Then to Hannah. A waitress everyone had ignored. A woman he had ignored. The realization hit harder than the fraud. Because the signs had been there. Under his name. Inside businesses he owned. While he trusted the wrong people. His face lost color. For several seconds, he looked unable to speak. When he finally did, His voice was barely above a whisper. She told the truth. Nobody argued. Nobody could. Rick looked toward Evelyn. Evelyn looked toward the door. Neither moved. The man reached forward, picked up the bloodless little receipt that had started everything, placed it carefully in front of Samuel Briggs, and said, very calmly, "Call my attorney." The room remained silent long after the call was made. Nobody rushed to defend themselves anymore. Nobody argued over technicalities. The evidence had already done what anger never could. It had removed every place left to hide. By the end of the week, Rick Palmer no longer worked for the company. Neither did Evelyn Hart. Federal investigators arrived with boxes, warrants, and questions that stretched back years. Accounts were frozen. Internal records were reopened. Payroll fraud, falsified reporting, and financial misconduct became official language in official files, the kind that stayed attached to names forever. For the first time, Walter's disappearance was treated as something worthy of investigation instead of inconvenience. For the first time, Nathan Keller's records were corrected. His family received a formal letter acknowledging the fraud committed under his name after his death. Small things. Necessary things. The kind that should have happened long ago. Hannah expected relief. Instead, she mostly felt tired. There was no dramatic victory waiting at the end of months of confusion and fear. There was only paperwork, interviews, statements, long afternoons answering questions from people who suddenly listened carefully to every word she said. One morning, nearly 3 weeks later, she arrived at the diner and stopped in the doorway. The place looked different. Not because the walls had changed, because the atmosphere had. Nobody lowered their voice when she walked in. Nobody exchanged glances. Nobody called her sweetheart while ignoring her name. A new schedule hung beside the kitchen entrance. At the very top was a printed notice. Employee records corrected. Recovered wages issued. Missing tip allocations restored. Hannah stared at it for several seconds. Melissa appeared beside her holding 2 coffees. "You should probably read the second page too." Hannah turned it over. Her breath caught. Every employee whose tips had been diverted over the previous 2 years had been reimbursed in full. Not quietly. Not hidden inside payroll adjustments. Publicly. Officially. Names listed. Amounts listed. Accountability attached. Hannah looked up. They actually did it. Melissa smiled. Apparently somebody insisted. Later that afternoon, she was called upstairs to the same private dining room where she had once been asked to sign a lie. The polished table remained. The crystal lights remained. But the room felt smaller now. Less intimidating. More honest. The man who had spent weeks sitting in the dark booth stood near the window. Samuel Briggs sat nearby reviewing documents. Hannah entered cautiously. The man handed her a folder. "What's this?" "Corrections." Inside were hospital payment confirmations. Collection accounts closed. Insurance disputes resolved. Legal protections established against future retaliation. Not gifts. Not charity. Corrections. Hannah looked up slowly. "Why?" The answer came after a pause. "Because those bills were used to keep you quiet." Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Just real. "I don't want anyone owing me anything," Hannah said softly. "Neither do I." For the first time, she believed him. Before she left, Samuel placed one final item on the table. A small shadow box. Hannah frowned. Inside rested 2 objects. Her mother's bent blue name tag, and the faded receipt that had started everything. The receipt no longer looked important. Just a piece of paper. A thing most people would have thrown away. Yet somehow it had changed everything. "We were going to replace the name tag," Samuel said. "New plaque. New engraving." Hannah reached into the box and picked up the old one instead. The metal was scratched. Bent at one corner. Worn smooth by years of use. Her mother had once hidden it because she was embarrassed by how old it looked. Hannah smiled faintly. "No." She pinned it carefully inside her apron. "This one's fine." That evening the diner closed an hour early for the first time in years. Employees stayed after their shifts ended. No speeches. No ceremony. Just coffee, pie, and the strange comfort that comes after surviving something together. Hannah sat at her usual booth near the window. A clean apron hung beside her. The rain had finally stopped. Across the room, the man watched quietly as people laughed. As people relaxed. As people who had spent years being ignored were finally seen. Hannah lifted her coffee cup. "You know what the funny part is?" she asked. He looked over. "What?" She glanced at the old name tag resting against her apron. The truth was never hidden very well. The man said nothing, but for once, silence felt warm. Outside, the neon sign glowed softly against the darkening sky, and inside the diner, the woman everyone had once overlooked was finally being heard.